I have so many happy memories here at the new St. John. I say the new St. John because, as some of you may or may not know, the original church is right across the street from here. I don't have very many personal memories of the old church, but I know that the roots run very deep. I spent my Sundays here as a youth, being involved in the youth group and Sunday school. I had to do a lot of research to dig back into the past before I was born and before my grandparents were born to shed some light on what happened 85 years ago. This serious-looking couple are my great-great-grandparents, James and Sarah Wrights. The year was 1913 when James and Sarah were raising their 3 boys and 2 girls in a rural Pennsylvania Dutch area. While visiting my grandfather recently, I asked him if all they spoke was Dutch. He replied, "Oh, yes. In fact, whenever the adults didn't want the children to know what they were talking about, they would always speak in Dutch. English was only spoken in school." After moving to Ashland, Pennsylvania, James bought a grocery store and ran it for several years before selling and moving to Florida. The year was 1920 when the Wrights family decided to move down from Pennsylvania to Sunset Harbor, Florida. I believe that arthritis was a reason for the move, so a warmer climate seemed more suitable. James S. Wrights was the patriarch. He and his son John came down one summer to take a look around. After seeing the beauty of what is now Lake Weir, he quickly decided to purchase several hundred acres. Then they had to head back to Pennsylvania to prepare the family for moving or separation. The pioneer Wrights family consisted of 7 household members. They included the matriarch and patriarch, James and Sarah, and their children, Will, John, Charles, Flossie, and Colelma, also known as Lily. Just before they could move down here, James and John Wrights set out to build a home for the family. They built what is called a barracks home, which looks sort of like a motel. It provided separate compartments for each individual family since several of James and Sarah's children were married. At the time of the move, the family had a total head count of 14. When the family got here, their first thoughts were of the Lord. They attended the Weirsdale Presbyterian Church during the first summer and then began holding services in their own barracks home in the fall of 1920. Reverend Harvey Lyman Straub conducted these services and promised to continue serving them the following fall. However, they soon heard of a Lutheran minister, Reverend John Howe from Lake Helen, and he soon became their pastor. Reverend Howe helped organize the first congregation in 1922. Here marks the birth of St. John Lutheran Church. In the fall of 1922, Will Wrights' home was completed. Services were held here until the first church was built. Here our congregation has its beginnings. The lot for the first church building was purchased in 1923. The site is at the corner of Southeast 159th Street and Sunset Harbor Road. On March 27, 1927, the congregation moved into their new church. The dedication was held on April 17, 1927. It was just a bare sanctuary with backless benches for pews, but it was a real church building. The congregation was more than thankful for that. The church was big enough to seat 150 people and came to a total cost of only $1,350.78, including a lot and a piano. The Wrights family continued to grow. The Geists moved down from Pennsylvania and built the home that is now at the corner of Southeast 105th Avenue and County Road 42. In 1932, the family pitched in and built a home for Charles and Minnie Wrights. Charles and Minnie are the parents of Stuart Wrights. Stuart was born and raised in this house. He inherited it in the 1970s and lived there with his wife and my grandmother, Marion Wrights, until her passing in December in 2002. Stuart continues to live there today. The altar area of the first church comprised of a stove on the pulpit side of the altar with a tall stack attached to a red brick chimney on the outside back wall. The altar rail was solid and benches were made of slats, but were later replaced by pews. It could get very hot with the fire going since the pulpit was on the same side as the stove. Benches for the choir were located where the organ was later placed. The sanctuary was also used for Sunday school. The altar chairs were made of oak wood and were crafted by Mr. Eckstein from Leesburg. Hilda Bonin gave the church an original painting, which at first hung on the wall behind the altar and later hung over the doorway into the church from the narthex. A fellowship hall was added to the back of the church in 1956. Here the congregation gathered after services for coffee, tea, punch, and snacks. I personally remember happy times here, running around as a small child, stealing people's attention. The church congregation continued to grow. The sanctuary was becoming too small to fit everybody in, and parking was becoming a problem. In 1992, plans for a new church building were discussed. Esther Anderson died peacefully in her home that year. Her home and property were transferred to the congregation as she had wished. The house became the new parsonage, and the old parsonage became the education building. It wasn't until July of 1995 that the congregation was able to find a builder that suited both the ministry and monetary needs of St. John. On July 14, 1996, the groundbreaking service for the new church was held. The congregation processed from the existing church to the site of the new church, singing "Lift High the Cross." Then finally, after years of planning, St. John celebrated the dedication of the new St. John Lutheran Church building at one service on May 11, 1997. The celebration started at 10 a.m. in the old church building with the brief order of confession and forgiveness and the thanksgiving of the disposition of a church building. Then the congregation processed to the new church building singing "Lift High the Cross." While gathered outside the new church, the new cornerstone was laid and the new church key was presented by the architect and contractor to Pastor Mazingo, building committee chairman, and council president Bob Renner, and past council president Howard Kruger. Stuart Wrights, the grandson of James and Sarah Wrights, read the list of items included in the cornerstone. Once the procession and congregation entered the nave, there was a dedication of the building by Reverend Dr. Kathy Baines, assistant to the Bishop of the Florida Bahamas Synod, ELCA Northern Mission District. Pastor Himmelman dedicated the pulpit and lectern, Pastor Mazingo the altar and appointments, Pastor Slee the other furnishings. The pulpit, lectern, and altar were built by Lou Brown, a member of St. John. Pastor Mazingo led the dedication of the people. In the service of praise and proclamation, Dr. Baines preached the sermon. The service closed with the celebration of Holy Communion. A reception followed in the fellowship hall of the new church. I think my ancestors would be very proud of the way the congregation of St. John has maintained and preserved the uniqueness and welcoming atmosphere that is St. John Lutheran Church. It's amazing that a church that has also maintained its small-town feel can survive 85 years of stewardship, worship, and service. It's important to keep the history of St. John Lutheran alive. Knowing how we got here is essential understanding where we are going. Thank you and God bless.